You're listening to Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall on CJAD 800.
That is James Mennie over at the Gazette. And Jim, I'm going to start with this story. Gazette just picked up on this a little while ago. The government-appointed advisory committee urges the government to scrap that tuition hike for McGill and Concordia. And the government says what? It will ignore the committee. Why, Jim?
Well, and this is, first of all, my hat's off to Andy Riga of the Gazette for grabbing this story, because if there was any doubt that this, what was described as a targeted attack on English language universities in Quebec by Francois Legault and his entourage, is anything other than flat-out Anglophobia aimed at currying favor with, root supporters of the CAQ who have never been nor will ever be to Montreal, and in some cases may have had difficulty in finding Montreal on a map. It is over, because the office of Pascal Derry, the Minister of Higher Education, told Mr. Riga of the Gazette that, yeah, we got this. Unfortunately, this report was filed 4 days after the January 15th deadline that the minister gave for opinions to be submitted. So we're not going to pay any attention to it. Now, remember, this is not some people who got together at a bar and wrote a letter to the government. This is a government-created committee whose opinion, even though the recommendations do not have to be followed, whose opinion must be sought. So they're not even saying we're going to consider this or look. We're not going to look at it because it's 4 days late from this, deadline the minister came up with. So no, there's no more veneer of protecting the French language. There's no more veneer of this being to help finance, Quebec higher education. This is a flat out kick at English Quebec by Francois Legault and his coterie of cabinet ministers. And quite frankly, I despair of where we're going to wind up. It's clearly not being picked up. It was picked up to a certain extent by the French media, simply because a lot of French language institutions turned around and said this is absolutely preposterous. But yeah, it seems that even though, as fun as it is to watch Francois Legault and his entourage spend the past 2 weeks finding new ways to step on rakes, this is still infuriating, and the absolute arrogance of that attitude from this government makes me despair for the next 2 years that we're stuck with them.
I would just like to add one thing here. As you go through this, Jim, and I was basically as taken aback by this as you, because it just seems like such a sham to begin with. You set up a committee, and then you don't like what they have to say, so you say, oh, well, they filed the report 4 days too late, so we're going to ignore it. I mean, doesn't that say to you, or maybe I'm reading this wrong, it wouldn't have mattered when it was turned in. They would have still have chosen, maybe find a different way to say it, and said, thanks for your work, and no thanks.
Well, this is not a mistake in terms of messaging. This message is very clear, because they could have turned around and said, listen, you know what, we'll consider this, we'll look at this, all the while knowing they're under no obligation to deal with the recommendations. They could have walked away from this and still given the committee and the issue the respect, at least, or the attention that it deserves. What has been said here is, sorry, we don't really care. It's too late. We're not interested in what this committee that we're supposed to listen to has to say on this topic, because they missed their deadline by 4 days. This is absolute rubbish. It is arrogant, Anglophobic presumption that you can wipe your feet on English Quebec and get away with it. I have a sneaking suspicion, and I'm not just trying to be cockeyed or optimist here. I have a sneaking suspicion this year is going to have a lot of bad surprises for Francois Legault. He's having them already. And I think that his treatment, his presumption that English Quebec can be used as a punching bag to jack up his poll numbers, quite apart from being disproved repeatedly, is really going to come back to bite him, and bite him hard. But in the meantime, as I say, I despair for the universities that are being targeted by this government for no other reason than it thinks somebody out in the hinterland might be prone to tell a pollster next month they support this government. It's rubbish, of course. Their popularity is plummeting, and this is doing nothing to promote it. But hey, when your horizon of ideas, when your horizon of political creativity involves either handing out checks to voters or going after various identifiable minorities, listen, I guess we have to manage our expectations.
Isn't it interesting, though, that a government that is so obsessed with polls, right, and governs, by those poll results, nonetheless is absolutely not interested in the least bit in hearing from anybody and really listening to those needs and responding to them accordingly. I'm curious, though, Jim, the student strikes that were happening at Concordia this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I haven't heard much about that. So are we assuming that has had little to no effect?
I presume it's going to have little to no effect because, let's face it, this story caught on, like I say, for a bit with the French media, to a certain extent with French Quebec. Nobody's going to be laying awake overnight wondering about this, about Anglophone universities. But I want to back up just a little bit because I'm beginning to get the impression that the polls have been so bad for this government. The polls have been so damning. Mm-hmm. For Francois Legault and what he's done to Quebec over the past 6 years. I think now they're going to go the other way. They are not going to care about the polls. They're going to do whatever they want. They will try and get their message out through, friendly conduits over at Quebec or over at the Journal de Montreal, Francois Legault's Facebook page. I think when the news keeps getting increasingly bad in terms of surveys, and as I say, God help us when Legault drops, and I expect that's going to happen this week or the week after. I think they're just going to turn around and say, we were elected we were given a mandate by the people of Quebec. We don't care what the polls say. We're going to do whatever we want, and down the four torpedoes in full speed ahead. In the meantime, though, I think the real thing we have to watch from now on is not policy, but the party. More and more scrutiny is being given to that unwieldy 89-member caucus that constitutes the CAQ government. And I think as much fun as we're having with this whole financing fiasco that has been made even worse by Francois Legault and company, I think we're going to have even more to talk about before this year is out.
I do want to add one thing, Jim, to add insult to injury. Eric Girard, did you read that quote today? Eric Girard saying, "I'm not a lobbyist for Quebec Anglophones." So he was taken to task.
He's a lobbyist for the CAQ government. He's a mouthpiece for Francois Legault, and he and every other so-called Quebec minister responsible for relations with Anglophones has been their duty has been to do nothing more than spout pious platitudes in public, pat us on the head, and hope that we'll go on our way and pretend that we give a damn. But the fact of the matter is, the bloom is off that rose. Everybody knows it. And as I said a couple of weeks ago on this very show, Monsieur Girard, he's in this up to his neck. Please don't look to Mr. Girard for anything other than lobbying of the NHL to get, ideally Quebec French-speaking hockey franchise back in this province. But anybody who's turning around thinking this government actually cares one iota for anything that happens to the to English Quebec is going to be sadly disappointed.
By the way, that quote is, "If I read the Gazette, Jim, for example, and I want to get depressed, I'll see how they evaluate my job as the representative of the English-speaking community of Quebec." And then he goes on to say, he says, "They'll say the minister doesn't do anything for English-speaking Quebecers. They'll give me a D- or a 3 out of 10. And so these people would like me to repeat what they're writing in their paper, and I will not do that. That's not how our institutions work."
What?
Of course not. He gets paid to repeat what's written in the Journal de Montreal.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And by
James,
the way, I would give him a lower grade than that already.
Than 3? Okay. James Mennie at the Montreal Gazette. Jim, have a great weekend.
You too, guys.